The sun had barely begun to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, when the sound of laughter filled the air. It was a typical day, kids riding bikes, playing tag, and the usual joyful chaos that comes with a warm evening. But amidst this ordinary scene, something extraordinary was about to happen. Something that would not only change one child's life forever, but also reveal the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and friendship. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The local park was calm, and families were scattered around, enjoying the fading light. In the middle of it all, a little girl named Emma was playing by herself near the edge of the woods. Her parents were nearby, chatting with friends, and couldn't have imagined the danger that was lurking in the shadows. Emma, her brown curls bouncing as she ran, was completely absorbed in her world of pretend games until she heard a noise. It wasn't a typical sound of the park, it was something deeper, more sinister. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She looked toward the trees, her tiny hand clutching her stuffed bunny a little tighter. There, hidden in the shadows, was something moving, a figure, large and menacing, creeping closer with each passing second. It wasn't a person, it was something else entirely. Emma froze, her instincts telling her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. But just when it seemed that the worst was about to happen, a bark cut through the silence. It was loud, powerful, and filled with urgency. The air seemed to crackle with tension as a large, brave dog came bounding through the trees, his eyes locked on the looming danger. His name was Max, a dog known by everyone in the neighborhood for his boundless energy and friendly nature. But today, Max wasn't playing around. Today, he was a protector, a hero in the making. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Max charge toward her, his tail held high and his stance determined. The creature, which had been inching closer to her, hesitated. For just a moment, it stopped, its eyes flicking between the child and the dog that now stood between them like a living shield. The tension in the air was thick, as if time itself had stopped. Emma could feel the weight of the situation, and though she was terrified, she knew one thing for sure: Max was her only hope. But the danger wasn't over yet. Max's growl was deep and menacing, warning the creature that it had no place near his human. But as the creature made a low, guttural sound, Max's body tensed, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Emma could barely breathe, her tiny body shaking in fear as she took a step back, inching toward the park bench, but she never took her eyes off the pair. Her mind raced, would Max be able to protect her? And just as the tension reached its peak, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Max lunged, teeth bared, ready to defend his friend with every ounce of strength he had. But then something happened that no one expected. The creature turned and bolted back into the woods, retreating into the shadows from which it came. Max's bark echoed through the trees as he pursued, but then, just as quickly as it had started, the threat vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence. Emma, still trembling, felt a rush of relief wash over her, but also confusion. What had that creature been? Why had it come so close to her? And what had made it run off so suddenly? Max, panting heavily, trotted back to Emma's side, his protective gaze never leaving the woods. He nudged her gently with his head, as if to say, "You're safe now." Emma's hands shook as she reached down to pat him, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Max," she said, her heart still racing. But Max wasn't the only one who had been shaken. Emma's parents had seen the whole thing unfold from a distance, their faces pale with fear. They rushed over, pulling Emma into their arms, their voices full of concern and disbelief. "What on earth was that?" her mother asked, glancing at the trees where the creature had disappeared. But before anyone could answer, Max let out a low, rumbling growl, his eyes never leaving the shadows of the woods. And that's when the real fear set in. Because Max knew something that no one else did, the danger was far from over. The creature hadn't just vanished, it had been scared away, for now. But it was still out there, lurking in the darkness. And next time, it might not run. But that was just the beginning. Max, brave as he was, had no idea what they were truly up against. The mystery of the creature would soon unravel, revealing a story that no one could have imagined. A story filled with danger, bravery, and a bond between a child and her dog that would change everything. So what happens next? Was Max the only one capable of saving Emma from the dangers that lurked in the woods, or was there more to this tale than anyone realized? Stay with us as we dive deeper into this unforgettable journey, where loyalty, courage, and the heart of a true hero are put to the ultimate test. Don't go anywhere, this story is just getting started. The park was silent now, the distant hum of traffic barely audible beyond the trees. Emma, clinging to her parents, still felt the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her small shoulders. Her mind was swirling with questions, but one thing stood out more than the rest. What had that creature been? And why had it come so close to her? Max, sensing the tension, sat at Emma's feet, his body tense and alert. He hadn't left her side since the confrontation, his eyes scanning the woods, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows at any moment. His growl rumbled low in his throat, a sound that wasn't just a warning to anyone who might get too close. It was a promise. Max would protect Emma, no matter what. Emma's parents, though shaken, tried to stay calm. They wrapped their arms around her, whispering comforting words that didn't quite reach her. Emma could see the fear in their eyes. They had seen the creature too, but there was no way they could fully understand the terror she had felt standing alone in the park, completely exposed, while Max rushed to her rescue. She had been so sure something was going to happen, so sure that the world was about to shift in a way she couldn't control. What was that thing? Her mother asked, glancing back toward the woods. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as the last bits of sunlight slipped below the horizon. Max's ears pricked up. His body remained stiff, but his growl was quieter now. He looked back at Emma, and for a moment, their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Emma didn't need to say it out loud. She knew that Max had sensed something far worse than any of them could imagine. Her father, sensing the unease that was quickly spreading through the air, put his hand on Max's head. "It's okay, boy," he said, but even his voice had a tremor to it. He seemed to be trying to convince himself more than Max. But no one could convince themselves that this was just a fluke. That creature had been real. And though it had disappeared for now, it wasn't gone for good. Emma could feel it in her gut, the feeling that something was watching, waiting for its moment to strike. Max had scared it off for now, but next time, it might not be enough. "We should get home," her mother said, glancing at her husband. "It's getting late, and we don't know what that thing was." Emma wasn't so sure it would make a difference. Home wouldn't protect her from whatever had just emerged from the woods. She wasn't sure whether it was a wild animal, something supernatural, or something else entirely. But as she looked around, she saw that everyone else was just as in the dark as she was. Her parents were doing their best to stay calm, but there was a shared look of worry on their faces, one that told her they knew they were far from safe. As the family walked home, Emma kept glancing back at the trees, the place where the creature had emerged. She still couldn't shake the image from her mind, the eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, the way it had crept toward her so silently, almost as if it had been watching her for a long time. What was it? And why had it targeted her? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Emma tossed and turned in her bed, the shadows of the trees looming outside her window. Max was at the foot of her bed, still watching the window, as if he expected the creature to return at any moment. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, had Emma's heart racing in fear. She kept thinking she saw something moving in the dark, but when she would turn her head to look, nothing was there. Max's presence gave her some comfort, though. She knew that as long as he was there, she wasn't entirely alone. He would protect her, just like he had at the park. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that Max wasn't just any dog. He had a special kind of connection with her, one that went beyond simple companionship. They understood each other in a way that no one else did. The next morning, Emma's parents tried to act as if everything was normal, but their attempts fell flat. Her father kept checking the locks on the doors and windows, and her mother seemed to jump at every little sound. Emma couldn't blame them. She, too, had felt a strange kind of unease that wouldn't leave her. They had no idea what they were dealing with, and that uncertainty was gnawing at all of them. It was only when Emma's father, while going through the morning routine, spotted something on the ground near the woods, something odd, something out of place. He crouched down and picked up a piece of fabric. It was torn, frayed at the edges, and a deep, dark red stain marred its surface. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she recognized it. It was from the park, from the direction where she had been playing. "Is that?" her mother started to ask, but her voice trailed off. "That wasn't there yesterday," her father said quietly, holding it out for her to see. "Whatever we saw yesterday, it wasn't just passing through." Emma's eyes widened as she stared at the fabric. It was torn, as if something had been caught in it, something large, powerful, and not human. Her mind raced as she tried to put the pieces together. What kind of creature could have caused this? And why had it been so close to her? She felt sick to her stomach, like the world was unraveling around her, but no one had answers. The woods felt more ominous now than ever before. Max was standing next to Emma, his eyes locked on the woods again. He was growing more agitated, his body tense, his tail rigid behind him. Emma could feel the fear emanating from him. Max had been brave the day before, but today he was on edge. There was something in the woods that had him worried, something that he hadn't quite figured out yet. After breakfast, Emma's father suggested they go to the park again. He said it was to get some fresh air and shake off the unease, but Emma knew better. It was an excuse, a way to make sure that everything was okay. Deep down, she knew they were all trying to make sense of what had happened, but no one wanted to face the truth. Whatever had been in the park wasn't something they could easily explain away. When they arrived at the park, it was as if nothing had changed. The grass was still green, the playground was still filled with toys, and families were out enjoying the day. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching. They stood at the edge of the park, just far enough from the trees that they couldn't see into the shadows, but close enough that Emma could feel the weight of them on her chest. Max was acting strange again. He wouldn't leave her side, his ears pricked forward, his body taut as he stared into the forest. Emma took a deep breath and stepped toward the trees, her heart pounding. The air felt thick with tension, like something was about to happen, but she didn't know what. Max's growl was low, barely audible, but she could feel the vibrations in the air. Something was out there. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. It was a low, growling sound, coming from deep within the trees. Max's head snapped toward the sound, his body tense. Emma's heart jumped into her throat as the noise grew louder, coming closer. It wasn't an animal's growl. It was something else, something human, almost, but twisted and wrong. Max's growl turned into a bark as he started to pull at his leash, dragging Emma toward the trees. Her parents rushed to catch up, but she was already moving forward, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. She knew Max was right. Whatever was out there, they needed to find it. And just when they reached the edge of the woods, they heard it, a rustling in the bushes, followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone stirring in the leaves. Max's bark echoed through the trees. "It's back," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. But it wasn't just back. It had been waiting. And this time, it wasn't going to run. The rustling grew louder, deeper, more deliberate. The air felt heavy, as if every breath Emma took was more difficult than the last. Her hands tightened around Max's leash, her fingers trembling, but the dog, he was calm, even though his whole body was vibrating with the need to protect. Emma could feel him pulling forward, eager to get closer to whatever was hidden in the thick underbrush. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time since the park, she could sense that Max was not the only one who knew how real the danger was. They were being watched. Emma glanced back at her parents, their faces pale, and saw the same mixture of fear and confusion mirrored in their eyes. They didn't understand what had happened, not truly. They hadn't felt the strange, cold sense of dread that hung over the park now, the feeling that something was waiting, biding its time, just beyond the trees. Her father stepped forward cautiously, his voice low and steady. "Stay close," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, but even he couldn't hide the tremor. "We're going in together." Emma nodded, her throat tight. She had never seen her parents like this, afraid, unsure. But she was more afraid of what might be lurking out there, waiting to find them first. The trees loomed high above them, casting long shadows that made the woods seem even more ominous. Max was the first to break the silence, his bark sharp and clear, cutting through the thick air. He was already moving forward, his body tense, ears standing tall. He stopped just short of the bushes where the rustling had been coming from, his nose twitching. Emma, following closely behind, felt a chill crawl up her spine as she watched him sniff the ground, searching for the source of the noise. A low growl echoed from the brush. Max's stance changed in an instant. His body was coiled, ready to leap at whatever lay hidden in the undergrowth. Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat. The sound of something moving too fast, too heavy reached her ears. And then came the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against bark. The bushes exploded with movement. Max barked fiercely as the creature lunged out from the trees. It wasn't what Emma had expected. Not at all. The creature that emerged from the shadows was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't an animal, at least not entirely. Its body was twisted, unnatural. Its fur was matted and clumped together, its eyes glowing a dull, sickly yellow. It had the body of a large hulking beast, but its face was strangely human-like, distorted, as if caught in the middle of a transformation. Its teeth, sharp and yellowed, were bared in a snarl that sent shivers through Emma's bones. Her father stepped forward instinctively, his voice hoarse. "Stay back," he shouted, but the creature didn't seem to care about warnings. Max let out a growl, louder and more forceful than before, his entire body tense with readiness. Emma clutched Max's leash tighter, her knuckles white, her heart racing as the creature stepped closer, its eyes fixed on them, on her. Her father stepped back, pulling Emma and her mother closer. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. But Emma couldn't take her eyes off the thing that now stood between them and the safety of the park. It was monstrous, but there was something wrong about it, something that didn't quite fit the natural order. And that was when she noticed it. There was something more to this creature, something far more terrifying than its grotesque appearance. As it moved, it seemed to be limping, its body dragging as if it were hurt. Its once confident, threatening stance was now shaking with something else, something that looked like fear. But why? Max didn't hesitate. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged forward, teeth bared, aimed straight for the creature's throat. But the beast was fast. It twisted and leapt to the side, dodging Max's attack, and then it turned on him. Emma screamed as the creature's clawed hand struck Max's side, sending him sprawling across the ground. The sound of Max's yelp pierced through the woods, and for a moment everything stopped. Emma's heart stopped. "Max!" she screamed, rushing forward, but her father held her back. "No, Emma," he shouted. "Stay back." But Emma couldn't listen. Her only thought was for Max, the dog who had saved her, who had protected her when no one else could. She had to help him. She had to save him. Her mother clutched at her, trying to pull her away, but Emma broke free, running toward Max, who was struggling to rise on his feet. The creature, now on its feet, was circling him, waiting for the moment to strike again. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Max growled again, trying to stand, but he was weak. The creature was faster, stronger. It was almost as if it was playing with him, toying with them. But Emma wouldn't let it happen. She had to do something. She glanced around, searching for anything that could help. Her eyes landed on a fallen branch nearby. Without thinking, she grabbed it, clutching it like a weapon, as she ran toward the creature. Her father shouted something, but she didn't hear him. She didn't care. Max needed her, and she wasn't going to leave him behind. She ran faster, her heart pounding in her ears, until she was right next to the creature. She swung the branch with all her strength, hitting the creature in the side. It yelped, startled, but it barely seemed to feel the impact. It turned its attention on her then, its yellow eyes narrowing in recognition. Emma felt a wave of terror wash over her as the creature took a step toward her, its claws outstretched. She was trapped. There was no way out. But Max wasn't finished yet. With a loud bark, he sprang at the creature, this time with more force, more purpose. He lunged at its legs, biting down hard, causing the creature to stumble. It howled in pain, and for the first time, it seemed like it was losing its confidence. Emma took the opportunity to pull Max back, pulling him toward her. "Max, come on," she shouted, pulling him toward her. He was badly injured, but still strong enough to run. Her father grabbed her hand, pulling her back toward the park. "We have to go now," he said, his voice strained. But the creature wasn't finished. It roared, shaking the trees as it stumbled after them. Max, limping and hurt, turned back and let out a final defiant bark. The creature paused for just a second, its eyes narrowing. Then it growled, its body trembling with rage, but it didn't follow. "Not yet. Go! Go!" her father urged, pulling Emma and Max along. They ran, their footsteps hurried, the creature's growls still echoing in the distance. But just as they reached the park's edge, something changed. Max suddenly stopped, his head jerking back toward the woods, his body tense, his ears perked. Emma stopped, her heart in her throat. "Max?" she whispered. And that was when they saw it. Out of the corner of their eyes, they saw movement. More creatures. Emma's heart pounded as she stared into the dense woods, her breath ragged and shallow. Max was still tense, his whole body coiled, staring into the shadows. She could see it now, just at the edge of the trees, something darker, something larger than before, moving between the branches. More creatures. More eyes, glowing in the deepening twilight. Her father, still gripping her hand tightly, was the first to see them too. His face went ashen, his eyes wide with fear. "There's more," he whispered, but the words felt like they were suffocating under the weight of the terror that gripped the air. Max's growl deepened, low and ominous. It wasn't just the one creature anymore. It was as if the entire forest was alive with them lurking, waiting, closing in. Emma's stomach twisted with dread as she realized that whatever this thing was, it wasn't alone. Her mother gasped, "We need to get out of here. We have to run." But Emma didn't move. Her body was frozen, her mind racing with thoughts that she couldn't quite grasp. The creatures had been bad enough, but now there were more. And the one thing she hadn't considered, hadn't wanted to think about, was that maybe these creatures weren't just random animals, or some kind of twisted mutant beasts. Maybe they were something else. Something far more dangerous. And then it happened. Without warning, the bushes behind them rustled violently, and something crashed through the foliage, coming at them from the side. Max barked and lunged, but it was too fast. Too close. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she saw a second creature, almost identical to the first, but this one was taller, its fur darker, more matted, its eyes burning with fury. It wasn't just a mindless animal, this one was different. It was smarter. It moved like it had a purpose, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Emma barely had time to react as her father grabbed her arm and yanked her away, pulling her toward the park's exit. But before they could take more than a few steps, the first creature, injured but not defeated, slunk forward from the trees. It was faster than before, moving with a chilling purpose. The creatures weren't just after Max, they were after them. And now, with the numbers growing, there was no safe place. Her mother let out a cry, pulling Emma closer as they began to run. But the creatures were too fast. They were everywhere now. Emma could hear their growls, the sound of claws scraping against the pavement, even as they dashed through the park. The sense of being hunted pressed down on her, the air growing heavy with tension, the rustling of leaves filling her ears with dread. Max, still limping but determined, was darting between them, trying to keep up, barking furiously at the creatures that now seemed to be coming from all directions. Emma wanted to call out to him, but the words wouldn't come. She could see the look in his eyes, the same look he had when he was protecting her in the park. He was willing to fight, but she knew he couldn't take on all of them. And then there was something even worse, the feeling that these creatures weren't just acting out of instinct, they were planning. There was a purpose to their movements, a kind of strategy. It was as if they were corralling them, trapping them, leading them into the heart of the park where there was no escape. The ground beneath them rumbled suddenly, a low, vibrating tremor that seemed to be coming from the woods themselves. Emma stumbled, her knees weak, and nearly fell, but her father caught her. They all stopped, panting, looking around. "What is that?" her mother whispered, her eyes wide in horror. Emma didn't have an answer, but Max's growl deepened into a low, terrifying rumble, a sound that made her blood run cold. Max was scared. And when Max was scared, they were in real trouble. Without thinking, Emma's father grabbed a nearby stick, the remnants of an old broken fence that had long since fallen apart. He held it up, but it was useless. The creatures were closing in, their eyes gleaming in the dying light, and the darkness was spreading like a flood, swallowing the park whole. Another rustle came from behind them, but this time, it wasn't just one creature. It was several, moving fast, too fast to escape. Emma turned around just in time to see the shadows forming, thick and twisted, all around the edges of the park. They were being boxed in. Emma's mind raced as she scanned the park. She remembered the narrow path that led to the back of the community center. If they could get there, maybe there was a chance to hide. But the creatures were closing in too fast. She could see the hunger in their eyes, the primal desire to hunt, and she realized that they weren't just hunting for food. They were hunting them specifically. There was no doubt in her mind anymore. This wasn't random. This was personal. Suddenly, her father shouted, "Run! Get to the center. Now!" Emma didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, pulling Max with her, her legs burning as she sprinted toward the pathway. Her mother was right behind her, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. But when Emma looked back, her father wasn't with them. He was still standing there, trying to defend them with the broken branch, trying to hold back the tide of creatures that were now closing in on all sides. "Dad!" Emma screamed, but he didn't look back. He was too focused on the creatures that were moving toward him, crawling out of the shadows, their eyes burning with malice. Her father swung the branch at one of the creatures, hitting it hard in the side. It yelped in pain, but it didn't stop. It snarled and lunged at him, its claws slashing through the air. Another creature, larger and more muscular, came from the other side, knocking the branch from her father's hands. He was unarmed now, outnumbered, and the creatures were circling him. "Go!" her father shouted. "Go now!" Emma could feel her heart breaking as she watched, helpless, from a distance. Her mother was still running, dragging Emma along, but she couldn't keep up the pace. Her eyes were glued to her father, who was now backing up, trying to fight with whatever strength he had left. He was trying to protect them, even when it was clear he couldn't fight off all of them. Suddenly, Max stopped dead in his tracks. Emma's heart lurched as she watched the creature that had been circling her father lunge for him. But Max, with one last burst of energy, charged forward, attacking the beast from behind. The two animals collided, snarling and biting at each other, as Emma's father stumbled away, gasping for breath. But just as Max was about to sink his teeth into the creature's neck, something strange happened. The other creatures, the ones still hiding in the shadows, seemed to hesitate for a moment. It was as if they were waiting, as if they were all moving in tandem. Emma's heart stopped for a second. What were they waiting for? And then, the real surprise came. A shape, emerging from the darkness, larger than all the others, stepped into the light. It was a figure humanoid, but with the same grotesque features as the others. It moved slowly, with purpose, as if it were in charge of the creatures. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It walked calmly toward Emma, its eyes fixed on her with an unsettling kind of intelligence. Her father froze. Max, too, paused mid-attack, sensing the change. Emma stood there, her chest tight with fear, as the creature approached them, its shadow stretching long in the fading light. "Run!" her father finally cried, his voice breaking. But it was too late. The creature opened its mouth and spoke, in a voice that was harsh and guttural, yet somehow human. "You shouldn't have come here." And then, everything went dark. The world seemed to shrink around Emma as the creature's words cut through the air like a blade. Her mind was reeling, her chest tight with fear. Max stood in front of her, his body tense, as if he could sense the danger, but the creature was already too close. Her father was still trying to catch his breath, his back against a tree, eyes darting between the grotesque figure and the pack of creatures that were now circling them like vultures. Emma knew they didn't have much time. The park, once a place of safety, had become a trap. And now the creature was closing in on them, its eyes dark and calculating, as if it knew something they didn't. Max was growling low, but Emma could see that the fight was already draining from him, his once confident posture starting to sag under the weight of the battle. The creature's humanoid form was monstrous, a twisted parody of what it once was. Its skin was pale, slick with the forest's moisture, and its eyes gleamed with a knowing malice. It took slow, deliberate steps toward them, as if savoring their fear. Emma could feel every muscle in her body tense, her fight or flight instinct kicking in, but she didn't know which way to turn. There was nowhere left to run. Her father stepped forward, his voice steady, but laced with desperation. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his grip shaking on the stick he still held like a weapon. The creature didn't answer immediately. Instead, it tilted its head, studying them with an almost eerie calmness. It was as if it had no rush, no urgency. It wanted them to feel the terror, wanted them to know the hopelessness of their situation. "We didn't ask for this," Emma whispered, clutching Max's leash tighter, her eyes darting between the creature and the darkening trees. "We just came here to the park. Why is this happening?" The creature's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "This was never about you," it said, its voice rough, like a knife scraping against stone. "You were never meant to be here. You stumbled into something you couldn't understand." Emma's heart sank. "What are you talking about?" she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. "What are you? What is all of this?" The creature took a step closer, and Max growled louder, a desperate, furious bark that rang out through the park. "You see, young one," the creature said, its tone changing now, almost kinder. "I was once like you. I was a human, just like you." Emma's mind went blank for a moment. She glanced at her father, who looked just as stunned as she felt. She opened her mouth to speak, but the creature raised a hand, stopping her with a wave of its bony fingers. The park, the creature continued, was once a place of peace. A sanctuary, if you will. But it was built on something older, something far darker. It has always been a place where things live, things that shouldn't. I was part of that. And now, it's time for me to complete my purpose. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she whispered, unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of the creature's words. "What are you going to do?" The creature's smile widened. "I'm going to finish what I started." In that instant, everything clicked into place. The creatures, the shadowy figures that had been tormenting them, the strange sense of being watched, it wasn't random. They weren't just mindless animals. They were part of something bigger, something that had been here long before Emma's family had ever stepped into the park. And the creature that stood before them wasn't just some wild beast, it was a guard, a keeper of whatever ancient force lurked beneath trees. Emma's legs shook as she backed away slowly, her mind racing with the terrifying realization. This wasn't just about survival. It was about something far darker, a twisted force that had been waiting to be unleashed. Max growled louder now, his body shaking with fatigue, but refusing to back down. His eyes met Emma's, and she saw the determination there, the same determination that had saved her earlier. He wasn't going to let this thing hurt her. Not now. Her father raised Broken Branch, taking a step forward, his voice low and harsh. "We'll fight you. We'll fight whatever you are, but we're not going down without a fight." The creature tilted its head, amused. "You don't understand," it said, its voice echoing in the still air. "This was never meant to be a fight. You can't stop it." Emma's hands trembled, but she didn't let go of Max's leash. She knew her father was right, they couldn't just give up. But what kind of power was this creature talking about? What kind of evil had been lurking in the park for so long? Suddenly, without warning, the creature lunged forward, its claws outstretched, aimed directly at Max. Emma screamed, but before she could react, Max leapt between them, his teeth sinking into the creature's arm. The creature roared in pain, stumbling back, but it didn't stop. It wasn't enough. Max was brave, but he wasn't strong enough. Her father shouted, grabbing her and pulling her back. "Run, Emma." "Go." But Emma couldn't run. Not now. Not after everything Max had done for her. She saw Max standing there, bloodied but still fierce, his eyes locked onto the creature with a defiance that made her heart swell with pride. But he was growing weaker, and creature was getting stronger. And that was when Emma made a decision. As the creature came at them again, Emma threw the Broken Branch, distracting it just long enough for Max to charge forward and latch onto the creature's leg. The creature howled, its monstrous face twisting in rage, but Max didn't let go. It was then that Emma saw something she couldn't have expected, something that made her breath catch in her throat. Beneath the creature's skin, something was shifting. The pale, sickly flesh was moving, rippling. And then, from underneath, something more monstrous, more terrifying, began to emerge. The creature, once a twisted human form, was beginning to shed its disguise, revealing something far darker. It was no longer a creature, now it was something else entirely. A being of pure darkness, a shadow that was feeding on the fear around it. It wasn't just one being anymore. It was many. Emma gasped. It's not just one of them. It's an entire swarm. Her father barely had time to react. What does that mean? It means, Emma said, her voice shaking, we're not dealing with one monster. We're dealing with something that's been here for ages. It's feeding on the park's darkness. And in that moment, everything shifted. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, and from the depths, more creatures began to crawl out, their forms blending into the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. But there was one final, unexpected twist. Just as the swarm began to fully emerge, there was a flash of light, a burst of energy that split the air. The creatures paused, hesitated, and then, as if reacting to something, they began to retreat. Emma blinked, confused. What had just happened? She turned to see a figure standing in the distance. It was another person, someone they hadn't seen before, a figure cloaked in white light, who had somehow appeared in the middle of the chaos. Stay back. The figure called out, their voice echoing through the night. These creatures were never meant to be released. I will fix this. Emma's breath hitched. Who was this person? And how did they know what was going on? Before anyone could speak, the figure moved forward, glowing brighter with each step. And then, just as the creature, the swarm, and everything that had terrorized them seemed to pause, the figure reached out, and the ground trembled beneath them. The monsters froze. For a moment, there was silence, and then, with one last cry, the creatures vanished into the darkness, leaving only the quiet whispers of the night. But Emma knew that something was still not right. The park was safe for now. But whatever force had been controlling those creatures, whatever darkness had been unleashed, was still out there. And the mystery of the park was far from over. As the last of the creatures vanished into the shadows, the park returned to its eerie stillness. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets of the night, and the distant hum of city life felt so far away. Emma's heart still raced in her chest as she looked around, half expecting the creatures to reappear at any moment. But the glowing figure, standing tall and confident in the middle of the park, seemed to have done something that none of them had been able to do: stop the nightmare. Emma's father stepped forward, still panting, his face a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaky but filled with awe. He kept an arm around Emma, who had collapsed onto the grass, still catching her breath, but she couldn't take her eyes off the glowing figure. The figure stepped closer, revealing more of its form. It was a woman, tall and strong, her face illuminated by the light surrounding her. She wore a long, flowing robe of white that shimmered like it was made of stars, her eyes calm and knowing. Despite the otherworldly aura, there was something deeply human about her, something that made Emma feel like she could trust her, even in the midst of everything that had just happened. "I am a guardian of sorts," the woman said, her voice gentle but firm, "and I've been watching over this place for years. But there are things in this world that go beyond what we understand, things that thrive on darkness, on fear." Emma's father took a hesitant step forward. But the creatures, those things, what were they? The guardian glanced around at the park, as if gathering her thoughts before answering. They were never supposed to be released. A long time ago, before any of us were born, this park was built on ground that held an ancient force. It was a place of power, hidden from the world. Over time, that force was forgotten, buried beneath the normal life of the park. But it never truly left. And when the balance was disturbed, the creatures, those beings of darkness, started to emerge. Emma's mind raced. So this wasn't just a simple creature attack. It was something much bigger, something far more terrifying. But why did they come after us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why us? Why didn't they just leave? The Guardian's gaze softened as she looked at Emma. Because you were the ones who disturbed the peace. This park was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where that darkness could be kept at bay. But you and your family, by coming here, by unknowingly uncovering something you weren't meant to, started the chain reaction. The darkness, the creatures, they were drawn to your fear. It became a cycle. The more fear, the stronger they became. Emma glanced at her father, who was now processing everything the Guardian had said. So it wasn't just random. We weren't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, the Guardian replied, her tone steady. You didn't stumble into something you didn't understand. You became part of it. Emma's heart sank as she realized the magnitude of what had happened. The park, the creatures, the nightmarish events that had unfolded it, was all connected to something deeper than she could have ever imagined. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. So, what happens now? He asked. The creatures are gone, but what about all of this darkness? Is it really over? The Guardian glanced around again, her expression pained. The creatures are gone for now. I sealed the portal that they were coming through, but that doesn't mean the danger is gone. The force that drew them here is still lingering beneath the surface, waiting for another crack in the world's fabric. She looked at Emma and her father, her expression full of concern. The balance is fragile. This park isn't just a piece of land, it's a battleground for forces far older than you can understand. The darkness will try to come back, and if it does, you may not be as lucky next time. Emma shivered, the gravity of the situation sinking in. She was no longer a passive bystander in a strange event. She was part of something much larger, something that could come for her and her family again, at any time. So, what do we do? Emma asked, her voice quivering but determined. How do we stop it for good? The Guardian's gaze met hers, and Emma could see that she had been expecting this question. There's no easy answer, the Guardian said softly. But the best chance we have is for you and your family to leave this place. You need to distance yourselves from the park. It's not safe here anymore. Emma's heart sank. But what about Max? He fought so hard to protect us. He was brave. The Guardian knelt down beside Max, gently petting his head as he lay beside Emma, exhausted but still alert. Max is special, she said softly. He protected you because you have a bond that goes beyond just being pet and owner. He's connected to the park in ways you don't fully understand. He's been chosen as its protector. It was always in him. It was part of why he fought so hard. Emma blinked in surprise, her eyes widening as she looked down at Max. Could it be true? Could her dog really be a part of something so much larger? She knew Max was brave and loyal, but she never imagined that he could be connected to something so powerful. But before she could say anything, the Guardian stood up and looked back at them, her expression serious. For now, your family is safe. But I will be keeping an eye on the park. If the darkness stirs again, if the creatures rise once more, I will be there to fight them. You can't protect this place on your own. Her words hung heavy in the air, but they also gave Emma a strange sense of reassurance. Maybe the battle wasn't over, but she wasn't alone in it. She didn't have to fight it all by herself. Her father stepped forward, his voice steady. So, what's our next step? What do we need to do to make sure the park stays safe? The Guardian's gaze was soft but resolute. For now, the only thing you can do is leave. The park is too dangerous. And there are other places like this, where the darkness is hiding. You must be prepared to face those as well. Stay close, keep your family safe, and always trust your instincts. The darkness will always try to find a way back. She paused, and then looked at Emma, her gaze intense. You, young one, have more power than you realize. Your strength is in your heart, in your ability to protect those you love. That will be the key to stopping what's coming next. Emma nodded slowly. There was still so much to understand, so many questions left unanswered. But in that moment, she felt a sense of resolve. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had been thrust into something far larger than she ever anticipated, and she had to be strong. Not just for her, but for her family and for Max. The Guardian gave one last look to the park, a subtle frown crossing her face. I will be here watching, but you must go now, she said softly. The darkness has been held back for now, but the fight is far from over. You must be ready." And with that, the figure slowly began to fade, dissolving into the light, her presence becoming less and less until she was gone entirely, leaving only the soft rustling of the trees in her wake. Emma stared after her, her mind buzzing with questions, but her heart feeling a strange peace. They were safe for now. But as they turned to leave the park, heading toward the warmth and safety of their home, Emma knew the journey was far from over. Whatever darkness had been unleashed was still out there, waiting for its chance to return. Max limped along beside them, still tired but alert, as if he knew they had a long road ahead. Emma reached down to scratch him behind the ears, her eyes softening as she looked at the dog who had saved them. "Thank you, Max," she whispered. "You're more than just a hero. You're part of this." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with something unspoken, something deep and knowing. And for the first time, Emma understood. This wasn't just a dog she had raised. Max was something far more important. He was a protector, a guardian in his own right, and together they had survived something unimaginable. As they left the park behind, the night closing in around them, Emma felt a sense of purpose rise inside her. She would be ready. She would protect her family, and she would face whatever darkness came next, because she knew, deep down, that she was capable of more than she ever realized. And as they walked into the safety of their home, Emma glanced over her shoulder one last time at the park, where the shadows seemed darker than before, and the trees whispered their secrets. The fight wasn't over. But they would be ready. And no matter what came next, they would face it together.